Welcome, everyone. We're going to keep saying Happy New Year because we're still in January. It's wonderful to see you all. I know we have some new faces in the mix. Welcome to the Small Giants Community first virtual event of this year. And to all the familiar faces, we're so excited to have you back. My name is Hamza. I'm the executive director of the Small Giants Community. And we also have the whole team here. We have Bridget somewhere in the corner there, and Katie, and you're going to get to meet Paul. And of course, Shed, our host today. A couple of things, if you are new to us, we are casual, we are conversational, and we're going to participate today. So we hope if you are able to, and decent, all that good stuff, and in a space where you can be on camera, we want to see you. So please do that. And if you're not able to, that's okay too. We're also going to participate in a breakout at some point during this hour. And so we would love for you to be taking part of that as well. You go in a breakout of about 4 people. And it'll be a really wonderful conversation. And if you haven't met other small giants, you're going to love them. But if you cannot participate for some reason, please put an asterisk next to your name. And that will indicate to us that you can't participate. So we will not put you in a breakout room. Okay, so we hope you can participate and you can keep things as they are. But if you cannot join a breakout room, put an asterisk next to your name, and then we won't put you in one, and you'll just join the larger conversation afterwards. We're recording and we're taking notes, and we'll share all of that with you by tomorrow. And I think that's it. So with that, I would love to welcome Paul to the mix. Paul is the co-founder of the Small Giants Community, and he'll be moderating today's conversation. Paul, take it away.
Thank you, Hamza. And hey, everybody, good to see you. So many old friends. Happy New Year. We're just so excited to start off the new year this way. And welcome to people that are maybe new to the community that haven't joined us before. So like Hamza said, it's very casual. We want this to be interactive. So you guys raise your hands and participate all along the way. I'm really happy to introduce our guest today, Stephen Shedletzky, better known as Shed. So we just call him Shed, all right? And so he's real casual too. And he's had years in the corporate world, but then was inspired by Simon Sinek, like many of us have. But he went a step further than just being inspired. He actually went to work with Simon, was actually his 4th employee, has been working with him ever since. So collaborating along the way. And his passion is psychological safety in the workplace. So has taught about that, has built a thought leadership practice around that. And more recently, in the fall, published a book called Speak Up Culture. When leaders truly listen, people step up. That seems to make a lot of sense, but we're going to figure out how that really works. So Shad, welcome.
Thanks, Paul. I'm glad the title makes sense. That's a good start.
Yeah.
And let's hope all the things within it also make sense and are helpful. So thanks all for being here. Delight to join you all.
Yeah, so let's just jump in. Why don't you tell us what inspired you to write the book?
And I'm going to share a few slides here as we go, just to help bring this to life. So what inspired me to write the book? So I'm a big fan of a quote by a Danish theologian by the name of Kierkegaard, who says, life makes sense looking backwards, but it must be lived forwards. So this is very much a semi-autobiographical book. As I reflect on sort of my life and what got me to this point, it makes sense that I've written this book. There are 2 main sort of things that were the catalyst. One, I grew up with a stutter. I still have a speech impediment. I married a speech therapist. Good choice, not just for me, but also for my kids and nieces and nephews. But I know intimately as a young kid and young adult up until sort of my early 20s, that sort of debilitating fear of not wanting to use my voice, not wanting to speak up, really for fear of failure, for fear of being judged. Found my voice, and a big part of it was actually beginning to speak about overcoming a fear of public speaking. So that's one piece. The other is, in my 15+ year career, I've been parts of a myriad of teams. I've been parts of teams where there is a speak up culture, and it's marvelous. Not only is it better for business, the quality of our relationships are way better as well. And then I've also been part of teams and organizations where there isn't a speak up culture, or where you once had one, but typically because of a change of leadership, it disappeared. And not only was that bad for business, we spent inordinate amounts of time hiding and lying and faking from each other for fear of retaliation or being punished, but it's also bad for our health and well-being. So I've become staunchly passionate about this thing called the speak up culture and how we can better cultivate them in all of our relationships, whether we're a capital L leader or lowercase l leader, you know, whether we have the title or just simply wish to lead in our relationships.
So it almost sounds like we should all know what a speak up culture is, but I'm going to venture to say that many of us don't, or we might assume that it means one thing and it means something else. So tell us what your definition is.
Yes, definitions are in order. So I fully admit when I started writing this book, I thought I was rebranding psychological safety. I'm a big fan of Amy Edmondson. Amy actually endorsed the book. Thank you, Amy. But as I delved into the experience of what it means to be part of relationships and organizational cultures where we can speak up, I realized that there's more to it. So the way I define a speak up culture is it's an environment in which we feel both psychologically safe and that it's worth it. We might feel safe, but if it isn't worth it, I'll dive into that phenomenon more on the next slide. But it feels safe and worth it to share ideas, even if they're half baked. I once shared a half baked idea at an executive team meeting, and I got while we were waiting for members to show up, and when the most senior member showed up late, and said, "What are you talking about?" And I essentially said a half-baked idea. I got berated in front of the entire executive team for sharing a half-baked idea. That was the last time I ever shared any idea with that executive team because it was no longer safe or worth it. Didn't know what was going to happen, right? Sharing feedback, and we'll speak more about what makes up good feedback as we hop into this session. There's going to be some content we have on what good feedback is. Feedback is designed to be a dialogue and help one another grow. To share concerns, even if they're unpopular or personal, to disagree or dissent, especially with folks more senior to you, and to admit mistake, believing it will lead to improvement, not being repeatedly ignored or punished. So that's how I would define it. It's this environment where hard conversations, truthful conversations, candor, bad news or hard conversations, as well as positive, generative, idea, innovative conversations that create change are also welcome and rewarded.
So it's a really freedom and safety around speaking up and speaking your mind and knowing that you'll be able to do that without all these negative repercussions. So I'm sure in the book you tell us kind of how to do it.
Yeah.
So share some of those ideas.
Yeah. So a couple of things. So one is this isn't in the book because I thought of it after we sent it to print. So hey, look at that. But I've realized that there's this spectrum when it comes to speaking up. That speaking up isn't sucking up. That's called hogging air, and it's not with an intent to serve. It's with an intent to be seen as. Speaking up is also not a hall pass to be a complete jerk. So there is this sweet spot when it comes to speaking up. It includes tact, decency, respect, emotional intelligence, situational awareness. Now, it doesn't mean that we nail it all the time. Now, if some folks speak up because, oh, boss says speak up, so I'm going to suck up, the opportunity is to provide coaching and feedback on zip it and let others speak up because it's not about hearing one voice all the time. On the other side, if someone shows up and they don't bring emotional intelligence, awareness, tact, decency, respect, there's coaching on not necessarily the intent, because the intent could be positive, but there can be coaching and feedback on the behavior and the impact on that behavior. And some of us, maybe there's neurodiversity, or maybe there's some issues going on that we might not be aware that we're being a jerk, but there's still worthwhile feedback on, hey, great message. Let's talk about better time, better way, so that this can be received and actually be productive. I'll share two more things, and then we're going to hop into a great breakout conversation to help bring this to life, which will not be recorded, by the way, our breakouts, and we'll remind you of that. Kim Scott, who wrote the brilliant book Radical Candor, taught me that there's a very important rule when it comes to business books. which is you have to have a 2x2 framework. That's a joke. But I took a long drive. It was a 2-hour drive north of the city here in Toronto, up into Thornbury area, and I got my 2x2 framework and I wrote it down, and then the great illustrators gave it some life. And this helped me realize that a speak up culture is not only about psychological safety. And then Paul speak to, great, now how do we create it? So obviously, we want the upper right, high safety, high impact. I speak up because it's safe and it's worth it. It is never without fear. If anyone says the goal of this organization is to create zero fear in our culture, BS, doesn't exist. And if you label someone as a fearless leader, that's not the goal. Fear is biological. If you truly come across a fearless leader, they're dangerous, run far away, they're destructive. Fear is important. Fear is a risk modulator. And I think as leaders, the opportunity we have is to either create less fear or to create cultures where we have a fear muscle. We use fear to evaluate, fight, flight, freeze, pursue, move back, whatever it might be. But we want that upper right. We don't want this lower right, the low safety, low impact. It's just not worth it to speak up. This is an unhappy marriage between fear and apathy. That's how I felt after I spoke up in that executive team meeting where I got punished for sharing a good half-baked idea while we were just waiting for people to show up. But the reason I realize that speak up culture is more than simply psychological safety is what I'm going to describe next. So if you have safety but low impact, so I'll speak up, but it won't matter, it won't make a change. Either this is due to bureaucracy, red tape, systemic issues, or simply changes in habit that are too hard. You might speak up, but how many times do you go back to a dry well before you give up and move on to a different well, or just give up altogether? Apathy can set in. The other one, and this is where courageous whistleblowing can happen, is where you don't feel safe, but it feels worth it. I'm afraid to speak up, but the stakes are too high. I feel so viscerally connected to the human stakes or whatever it might be that I'm willing as a courageous leader to put myself at risk to speak up internally, or whistleblowing is externally. We saw this with Ed Pearson at Boeing, which continues to happen as they make planes that aren't really so safe. And this happened in the U.S. Coast Guard recently with Dr. Kimberly McClear, who spoke out as a openly gay in a gay marriage Black PhD, who felt attacked physically and sexually and emotionally, and she wasn't the only one. And it started this wave of folks speaking up. So this, for me, is really interesting, that sometimes we will still speak up even if there isn't safety, but ideally we have both. The other piece before we go into a breakout, and then I want to hear, Paul, any sort of thoughts or reaction, how to create it is it's two virtuous actions: encourage and reward. So if you wish to create a speak up culture, you must encourage folks to use their voice, genuinely believe that that voice will actually make a positive difference, and then reward folks when they do. Now, reward doesn't necessarily mean bonus, pay increase, promotion, or a statue made in your honor in front of corporate headquarters, whether they're virtual or not. Reward could be thank you. Wow, that must have taken courage to share. I really appreciate it. Let's dig in more. I don't agree with everything that you shared, but I think there's merit to where you're going. We didn't implement your idea, but here's why. Like, these are all forms of reward to say your voice is worth it. Keep using it. It's going to make some sort of positive change.
So I do have a couple of follow-up questions. As all of us are probably thinking, well, we probably have a gut feel for whether we have a speak up culture in our organizations today. I would venture to say, because we're all like-minded, like-hearted small giants leaders, that we might lean towards, yeah, it feels like we do, but that versus reality could be something different. How do you evaluate whether you have that culture or you don't? How do you assess that initially?
So, I mean, there are assessments and things that can be done, and we're working on one on our small team as well to create like a actual assessment. Does it feel safe? Does it feel worth it, with good psychometrics? But I also want to lay out that, I'm often asked, Paul, can you give an example of an organization with a great speak up culture? And my answer is no. Because organizations change and organizations are dynamic. Let's take Microsoft as an example. Microsoft under Bill Gates, dorky, but infinite-minded, visionary, great culture. Under Steve Ballmer, who is the one who took over after Gates, highly performance-driven, highly competitive, short-term, finite-minded, not a great culture. Now Microsoft under Satya Nadella, reinvigorating the soul of Microsoft, a learn it all rather than a know it all culture. Like, I like what I'm hearing. Now, does that mean every single manager and leader at Microsoft is a perfect leader? Absolutely not. Never met one. And so, we can be in an organization that may not have a speak up culture as a whole, but there are pockets. And then we could have an organization that, from most senior ranks, seems like it's being well led, but there might be managers or pockets where the culture isn't as healthy as possible. But what I encourage folks to do is find those relationships where it does feel safe and worth it, lean into those, and lean into those to give you courage, because courage travels in company. So let's say I'm new to a team. I report into you, Paul, and I'm like, I don't know what it's like, but yet Hamza and I have a great relationship. And I lean into Hamza and I'm like, I have this idea. I think it can make things better, but I don't know how to do it and how to approach it with greater success. She can become my ally to help me succeed in that context. So lean into the relationships where there does feel like there's both some psychological safety and some perception of positive impact, and go from there. Modest, reasonable tests.
So she can help you understand how to approach Paul.
Yes.
With
Yes.
safety, right?
Yes. Or I often think that we view ourselves as automatic transmissions, but we're manual, right? It's not just park, drive, and reverse. We got at least 5 different gears. So this is platinum rule rather than golden rule. Golden rule is treat others the way you wish to be treated. That's fine for my 5-year-old who's in preschool. Not so great for us adults, where we should have empathy. So for me to realize what makes Paul tick, what's his disc profile, what's his Myers-Briggs, how can I show up and flex my style to be most effective with you, so that the team can thrive and get the best results. That's good adult platinum rule stuff that I think we need to lean into.
Okay, so we're all somewhere on this continuum. We all may have good parts of the organization, bad parts of the organization, good leaders, bad leaders, in terms of this dynamic of speak up culture. So as we try to move the needle, whose responsibility is it? Right? You talked about the big L, the small L, the worker who's not even a leader. Who owns this process?
Yes. The answer is yes. Everyone owns it. And it's at least 51% ownership from capital L leaders, at least 51. It's not 99. So I recently worked with a client that got rid of the term individual contributor. They're now called individual leaders, because you still lead your work, you still lead your life and career and your relationships. Love that. Then there's leaders of teams, and then leaders of leaders. So if you have a formal role of leadership, I call you a capital L leader. It is in your title or job description. As a leader, as a manager, you have responsibility for the growth, performance, and well-being of people formally, right? But we can all choose to be lowercase L leaders. My favorite quote on leadership comes from a dear friend, Rich Davini, who wrote the book, The Attributes. And Rich says, leaders aren't born, leaders aren't even made, leaders are chosen based upon the way that they behave. Leadership is a behavior set. When we behave as a leader, which includes empathy, compassion, courage, authenticity, doesn't necessarily include warmth or riz, as the kids say. That's charisma for anyone who's older than 35. It includes decisiveness, accountability. Like, there are a set of behaviors. So the sort of bang on answer to your question, Paul, is there's a disproportionate responsibility on capital L leaders, but it's 51 plus. Even if I don't have formal leadership, it's still my opportunity and responsibility to step in, try, lead in my relationships, even if I'm not a capital L leader.
Yeah, it makes complete sense. All right, it's probably a good time to get people talking. So what do you think about sending them to a breakout?
I think that's brilliant. So we have this breakout prepared for you, and we're going to turn off the recording once you go in. And we're going to give you about 10 minutes for this conversation, bring you back, debrief, share a bit more on feedback, and then we're going to bring as much time as we can for some Q&A as well, because we have some questions that already came in from all of you during registration, as well as want to hear what has been prompted in the conversation now. So here's what we'd love for you to do. We're going to put you in a group of 4 to 5 other brilliant Small Giants community members. Again, if you don't wish to be in a breakout, just put an asterisk next to your name. We totally get it. So here's what we'd love for you to do. Think of, and maybe you already have as you've been listening in this conversation, of a leader or a person in your life who has and continues to make it safe and worth it for you to speak up, where you can talk about unpopular or hard things. You can give them feedback. You're willing to accept feedback from them. Think of someone, whether you know them professionally or personally, could be a grandparent, a sibling, a cousin, a friend, or a colleague or boss, anyone, but someone who has behaved in a way that's made it safe and worth it for you to speak your truth. Now, the big question is, how do they behave? If leadership is in our behaviors, what were the specific behaviors that they displayed to make it and continue to make it safe and worth it for you to speak up with ideas, feedback, concerns, disagreements, and mistakes? When you hop into your breakout, would love for someone to volunteer as a scribe. Just spend, a quick amount of time saying hello, but hop into the meat of this conversation as quick as you can. And then take some notes and capture some themes. When you come back from this 10-minute breakout, I'd love for you to hop into the chat, write down those behaviors and themes that came out, and then hear from a few of you as well before we add in a bit more content and then open to Q&A.
One thing I'm curious about is, Shed, you mentioned kind of a previous trauma about the half-baked idea in the board meeting. And so we all come to the table with these traumas that impact how we show up in a speak up culture. And so what's the role of the individual addressing those traumas as well as the organization kind of addressing those past experiences?
Yeah, so we all sort of have, Travis, what I'll call like a speak up culture backpack that we all walk into new relationships with all the relationships that we've already had. So, if you're walking into an environment where it seems as though there is a speak up culture, but yet we sort of have past trauma around previous leaders or a relationship to authority or whatever it might be, there is that dual responsibility. One, for the folks on that team and in that organization to simply continue to repeat in a way that makes it safe and worth it. Now, for you, bit by bit, as if they're holding their hands out to feed you and you're a deer, just go closer and go closer and go closer and try modest, reasonable tests. And if it truly is a speak up culture, for you to say, hey, this is really hard for me because my previous relationships with boss or work or authority or whatever it might be haven't gone well. So I ask if you're just a little bit delicate with me, and just take those modest, reasonable tests. But the sort of wonderful thing about culture in general is I equate culture to the analogy of a pickle jar. So you can take a world-class cucumber that is highly ethical, talented, and hardworking. There's such a thing. Put it in some awful brine and it becomes an awful pickle. But it's no fault to the cucumber. It's the brine that it's in. Now, the good news about human beings is we can re-ferment. So we can, even if you've been soured, we can put you in a new environment that is healthy and thriving, and you can re-ferment and become a new pickle, right? And this is true as well of us if we come from families or cultural upbringings where we don't speak up, we're spoken to. We can actually change that if we're in a new environment, as they did in the Korean Airlines cockpit, where they didn't speak up because the Korean language is in and of itself extremely hierarchical. That's fine for your father-in-law, not so good when you have 250 people who are depending on you. So how do you debunk that and actually speak in a way, as was William was describing previously?
Thank you.
Hey, Shed, let's get to a couple of questions that were submitted in advance. It seems that it probably matters where you have these really important conversations. Are there any suggestions around best locations where people seem to feel safe in or out of an office environment?
It's a good question. I mean, what's so interesting is we now work both in this remote hybrid and in-person world. And so what I would say is lean into the platinum rule and figure out, make a best guess of how folks would like to receive that. So I know I'll talk about my own personal experience. So my business partner and head of operations, English is a second language. He's originally from Chile, so Spanish is his first language. And I've learned that when it comes to having hard conversations with him, he likes a heads up. He prefers to be notified. He prefers to have them live, as I do as well, whether that's over Zoom or even better in person. But what I'll often do is I'll write out feedback ahead of time so that he can digest it before we have that conversation. So I don't think there's any one silver bullet here, Paul, but I think it's learning one another's preferences. And even when you're hiring, to say, hey, how do you best like to have hard conversations and feedback conversations? And if the answer is F, none of the above, this isn't going to work well for you. This is how we typically do it. What might work for you? So I don't know if there's a one size fits all. But I do think there are some hacks around what people do prefer and continuing to build relationship around that.
You know, I know I could have written this question myself, but I tend to feel like I'm a pretty calming presence most of the time, and I have a really good poker face and try to make people feel comfortable. But I'm told that my facial expressions or my body language is just a total, is very clear about how I feel about something. And so how do I control that to make sure that those I'm dealing with feel comfortable interacting with me?
Well, so one is it's very hard to stop automatic responses. You can work to train or do different things. I think one of the biggest things we do in the realm of authenticity is to come clean. So if you know that if you hear something and often if you don't think it's a good idea, you might roll your eyes. You can say, hey team, I'm working on something. I need you to call me on it. Or when I do this, this is what's happening. I once had this with someone who was a very senior leader at a client services firm, and he had resting pensive face. That whenever he'd walk from one meeting to the next, he'd just be thinking because he's highly analytical and he's always thinking, right? And so the thing is he's not someone who was just hired to the firm last week and was brand new. He was like the managing director of the entire consulting practice. And so when he walked from one meeting room to the next, people noticed. So he couldn't change the fact that he had resting pensive face. That's just him. But anytime he interacted with a new group or new recruits or anyone, he would always say, when I'm walking from one meeting to the next, I'm often thinking, and in my head, it doesn't mean I don't want to say hello. So if you see me, please stop me, say hello. I promise I'll be friendly. And if I'm not, please call me on it. So I think it's more around how can we train folks as opposed to completely trying to change who we are.
Yeah, that's a great suggestion. All right, I think we got time for one more, and I just really want to ask you for the group, because you got mostly smaller businesses here, and people that are somewhere on this continuum. And let's say we really resonate with this, and we want to take this back and really start digging in with our organization to try to improve and get to that, top right quadrant, right? How do we start?
I think the biggest thing is to know that your opinion is but one data point. And so if you want to go back, if you want to create a speak up culture, you can cast the vision of this is what we're aiming for. We're not going to get it perfect every time, but we're really striving to try. Now, the only way we know if we're doing it is if we get feedback, whether that's through surveys and conversations as small groups, teams, one-on-one. And so, we can't just set it and forget it. We have to set it and then behave into it and get feedback and feed forward to know how we're doing. Because I can say it and do nothing about it. That's called a delusion. We need to actually say it and then behave into it and then get feedback, data points all around us to see how we're actually doing with it.
Yeah, great. Thank you so much, Shed. This has been wonderful. Some really good comments in the chat too. And I know we'll have follow-up recordings available as well. So Hemsa, we'll turn it over to you to close us out.
Thank you, Shed. Thank you all for joining us and participating. As Paul mentioned, notes and recording and some additional resources will be shared by tomorrow. Something that we're really excited about at the Small Giants community is our upcoming summit, which is taking place May 7 to 9 in Detroit, where we'll actually talk about this topic plus many others and make really wonderful connections. So information in the chat. We hope you can join us. Be well, everyone, and take care. Thank you.